Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is Tuesday, February the 6th, 10:30. It's time to get started on the Natural Resources Subcommittee. If you would, Agriculture and Natural Resources Subcommittee, excuse me. Mr. Clerk, take the roll, please.
Vice Chairman Darby. Here. Representative Fritz. Here. Chairman Grills.
Here.
Representative Halsey. Here. Representative Jones. Representative Reedy. Here. Representative Shaw. Here. Representative Todd. Here. Representative Travis. Here. Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Kyle, for that. Representative Shaw will lead us in the prayer and the pledge. All stand, please. Thank you all for being here today. We've got several guests in the audience. Right off the top, I want to take a point of privilege here and just to welcome the UT Commission on Agriculture and the efforts that they put forth. I want to mention everyone that's on the list here in a second, but I just want to take a second to recognize the members of this group and thank them for their service. And together, they are working to leverage the UT system's strengths to support the state's agriculture industry and its communities. The commission also identifies ways the university and its partners can collaborate to provide research, education, and outreach to contribute to the future success of the rapidly changing ag economy. I'd also like to thank President Boyd for convening this group and ensuring that UT system is aligned with the industry and community needs, as well as Dr. Carver and Donde Plowman, the UT Martin Chancellor, Yancey Freeman, for their leadership and support. I'll take a brief moment to recognize the commission members in the audience, and please know that our door is always open if there's a way that the legislature can partner with you to help support this most important #1 industry in Tennessee. Mr. Eric Mayberry, if you would just stand, and please, everyone hold your applause until the end, and we'll have them all stand, and then we'll give them a big round of applause and they can sit down. Eric Mayberry with the Tennessee Farm Bureau. Mr. Stephen Maupin with the Tennessee Soybean Promotion Council. Mr. Reggie Marshall with the Tennessee Fruit and Vegetable Association. Mr. Jim Bledsoe with the Tennessee Poultry Association. Ms. Phyllis Ferguson with the Tennessee Pork Producers. Ms. Carol Reed with the Tennessee Corn. Dr. Charles Gone, Chair, UTIA Eastern Region Advisory Council. Mr. Joe Huffine. I owe him something for about 2012. I'll get to that in a second. UTIA Middle Region Advisory Council, and Mr. John Charles Wilson, Chair of the UTIA Western Region Advisory Council. Let's all give them a round of applause, please. In 2000, I started that there. In 2012, there was a program that Farm Bureau put together called Ag Star in West Tennessee. I was involved in it, and Mr. Huffine was part of the media training, and he has this big, strong, deep voice, and I was several years younger, obviously. And I remember going in there, and man, he put me through the ringer, and everyone in that room was fearful of him from that point on. So I wish I could get you up here to ask you a few questions a day. But for time's sake, we won't do that. But we also have a special guest here. President Boyd's here with us, and Dr. Carver is going to be here tomorrow to present to the full committee, but we're going to take just a few seconds here and allow President Boyd to say a few things. So without objection, we'll go out of session. President Boyd, you're recognized.
There are. Chairman Grills, members of the committee, thank you for giving me a few minutes to speak. Chairman Grills said you could have a couple of minutes, and then he just cut me down to a couple of seconds. But I'll be really, very, very brief and just say, as you know, University of Tennessee is the land-grant university for the state of Tennessee. As part of our charter, it's to serve agriculture in the state of Tennessee. We've got 11 board members. Only one by statute is required to be on the board, and that's the Commissioner of Agriculture. This is a symbol of how important agriculture is to us. We've got 2 great colleges of agriculture that are growing, producing great people for our state, including research analysts for this committee. So we've got a lot of great graduates who are doing a lot of great work across the state. We've got 95 extension offices helping farmers in every single county across the state. And we've got 10 ag research centers. Thanks to you, we had $50 million last year to be able to invest in the infrastructure there. It's important for us to give back to the state through the talent that we produce, but also we want to make sure that we're aligned with agriculture. And the best way to do that, we felt, was creating this Commission on Ag. And it's been great working with them since the year 2019. We've got a really close relationship. We work together. We have 2 formal meetings each year, but we also work together constantly on different issues. And I've heard many of my members say this. I've heard the Commissioner of Agriculture, Charlie Hatcher, say this, but they've said that the agriculture industry across the state of Tennessee has never been more aligned. I think it's partly because of this Commission on Agriculture. So thank you for recognizing us today. Thank you for all the support, and appreciate the few seconds to speak. Thank you.
All right. We're back in session. Thank you for that. Now, are there any personal orders that any member may have on the committee? Representative Darby.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know if we've ever had an all-star ensemble of the Tennessee group here like we've had this morning here at the Cordell Hull building. And I appreciate y'all's leadership and vision for the state of Tennessee. Thank you.
Anyone else? All right. Tyler, you're recognized for a wisdom of the day.
Good morning, everyone. Today's words of wisdom are brought to y'all by movie star legend, the old JW, the Duke, John Wayne. A man deserves a second chance, but keep an eye on him. Have a great day.
And with that, we'll start our calendar. Representative Travis, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just saw him walk in, the Tennessee Craft Brewery down here. Sharon, would you say just hello, welcome today. We appreciate y'all being here.
Thank you all for being here. First up on our calendar today, we have House Bill 1054 by Chairman Vaughn. I believe we've heard about this a time or two. We have a motion and we have a second. You are properly before the committee. Chairman Vaughn, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Myself. I appreciate your indulgence on this topic. It's one that's passionate to me. It involves private property rights that having to deal, and I want to repeat this word a lot today, and that's isolated. I'm talking about trimming back some of the regulatory oversight of isolated wetlands. And what are isolated wetlands? And I've gone on ad nauseum in front of this committee about some of the things that we've seen mitigated in my career with regards to places where cows have eaten around round bales, and looked at soybean terraces. And so things that have very limited ecological value with regards to our environment, yet with regards to the uncertainty that it casts and the time and the bureaucracy that it places on landowners and on people who are trying to use their property. And I also want to point this out too, as I looked up that I got information back from TDOT. They spend about $1.9 million each year on mitigation credits for road construction. So it's not just private individuals. This affects all of us. And so what we've done is and again, if I'm fortunate enough for this bill to move on, I went through the very dry aspect of reading through the Sackett versus EPA decision this morning. And our Supreme Court justices had some very poignant words to talk about with discussing this issue. But what I'm asking for is the original bill had come to say that we just wanted to be like several other states, including many of our border states, that regulates isolated wetlands as if they were waters of the U.S. And I have had many conversations with TDEC about this, and so we've talked about it, and I'm offering an amendment today to the committee, which expresses my desire to reach a compromise in this, to where that there's not ancillary unintended consequences of what it is that we're trying to do here. And so with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd like for the committee to entertain my amendment.
We have a motion on amendment 13341.
That is my
And a
mark.
second. Anybody have any objections to voting? All in favor of putting amendment 13341 on the bill, say aye. Any opposed? The amendment has been put to the bill. Mr. Vaughn, you are recognized.
Thank you, sir. And what this this amendment does is it does not look at wetlands homogeneously. And that's one of the things that frustrated me in my career, of seeing the fact that, again, a soybean terrace is treated the same way as a high-valued wetland that does have environmental quality. And I realized that my bill was going to do the same thing, even though it's isolated. Sometimes you can come across there's varying differences. And so what we've done is we have excluded a number of types of wetlands from this bill, but we've also taken low value wetlands out of the deal. And then we're trying to reach middle ground on moderate wetlands. And so my hope is, and again, if this bill moves from this point forward, would be that prior to it getting in front of the full Agriculture Committee, we will work with the attorneys and the stakeholders at TDEC to round this into shape to where we're comfortable with all of it, and have something that y'all could feel was worthy of being approved.
Fantastic, fantastic. Representative Shaw, we'll start with you, and then we have several people that may want to speak on this too, but go ahead and ask your questions and we'll see how time goes.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I will start by telling you I appreciate you, and I appreciate the fact that you've been trying to fix this along the way. And being, are you my representative on yours? I'm not for sure, but anyway, but I do have a couple of concerns, because you talked about the low level, maybe that term of wetlands and so forth. My experience has been what a wetland can be to look like today might be totally different in the future because of what wetlands do. I'm a little concerned about who would be responsible for if you identify a low-level wetland today and it don't turn out to be that way, and it affects some citizen in the future, foreseen. Who would be responsible for that? If that makes sense to you, is what I'm asking you.
Chairman Vaughn?
Oh, I can tell you that one, Representative Shaw. And frankly, and in full disclosure, Representative Shaw represents the district where my 5-generation family farm is. So we always laugh and jokingly refer to him as my representative. The process, now understand that, again, that farms and timberlands are excluded from this bill.
Mm-hmm.
A farmer can fill a wetland all day, every day, and off he goes.
Okay.
So we're talking about lands that are in transition.
Mm-hmm.
And so with that, what we're talking about is the process involves, let's say you want to build a house.
Okay.
And you've got a piece of ground out there, and you're going to disturb more than 1 acre of soil. You've got to go, there's a lot of people across the state that don't understand this is the process. It's much more in commercialized areas, but this is what you're supposed to do. If you're going to disturb more than 1 acre of soil that's not involved with farming activities, you've got to get a construction general permit and have your erosion control plan. And you've got to file all these documents with the state. They review it, and then there's a big amount of time to get that done. And then you go out, but when they go out and look at it, they'll say, hey, we need to know about a jurisdictional determination. And a jurisdictional determination involves somebody going out there and hunting for wetlands or streams, or what you always, in my business, I would a lot rather see something on a drawing marked WWC, which is a wet weather conveyance, than I had S1. So you go through that process and then you get that information and you give it back to TDEC again. And then they decide whether or not they agree with that. And then there's some arguing and jockeying between this consultant. And then you go from there, and then you decide how you're going to do your development plan and if it's going to require mitigation or not. And this is the thing that rubs me rawer than anything about this topic, Representative Shaw. It is the fact of how your land and your rights for your property are taken from you. Because think about this. It is your property, but a third party is going to tell you whether you can use it. And then, if you can't use it, then you have to pay another third party money for you to be able to use your property. That's something that just kind of just makes me want to bow up. That's the origins of where this bill came from. So there's a process to where you get your paper graded, is basically the answer to the question.
Representative Shaw,
And so your bill will do what, Dan?
Chairman Ball.
This amendment?
If we come in and we look at a piece of ground and you have your determination done, you pay your consultant, and they say these are low quality wetlands based upon these parameters, then you get your jurisdictional determination and off you go. And you're able to do with your property what you want to.
Okay.
But you are still having to hire a third party to review your property to tell you if you can use it.
Representative Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One final question. You talked a little bit last week about flooding concerns and so forth. And can you kind of go back over just kind of talk a little bit about what you did last week concerning and how that team, I'm sure, was concerned about how that flooding could take place. And can you clarify what this amendment would do if it's passed?
Chairman Ball.
Yes, sir. I have no concerns about this bill affecting flooding or increasing flooding opportunities. And the reason why is this. Wetlands, if wetlands are occurring in a regulated floodway, which is determined by FEMA, not TEMA. TEMA's up under FEMA. And so what happens then is, if it's in a regulated floodway, I can't fill in that anyway by another set of laws, because that's what governs flooding. And people say, well, there's kind of this esoteric thing that wetlands certainly don't, and I will agree, wetlands don't cause flooding. But there's not enough storage there, because the way that you prevent floods is you store water that's wanting to run off quickly as a result of rain. And the way you do that is by excavating detention basins to where water is held and then released out beforehand. And so personally, I'm struggling with the connection between this bill increasing flooding opportunities.
Thank you, Representative Shaw. Would it be okay with the committee if we were to go out of session? I know we have someone here from TEMA that may have shed some light on that. And we also have several people that want to speak that are just citizens and other departments that may want to. Is there any objections? Without objections, we'll go out of session. We'll bring up Mr. Greg Nolan, Alex Pelham, Jacob, I don't know how you say your last name, Bile. There's several others that are on the list that are here to answer questions. You're more than welcome to come up now if you would like, but if not, we'll wait until someone has a question of you. All right. Alex, you're recognized there.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Alex Pelham, the Chief of Staff at Tennessee Emergency Management Agency. First, I want to thank you guys for allowing us to be here to talk a little bit about this today. I want to start by saying, TEMA's number one priority, as outlined in the strategic plan for the agency, as well as what we've shown in staffing additions as well as legislation that is currently being carried by Leader Lambert is mitigation throughout the state. We try to lessen the impact. We try to take disasters and make them less impactful, less affecting from lives, from property damage, because we know that is going to set back prosperity of the state. It's going to set back potentially generational wealth. With that, flooding is recognized as a #1 hazard in the state of Tennessee and pretty much throughout the nation because of the occurrence of which it happens and the devastation that it can bring. 94 of 95 counties in their FEMA approved mitigation plan include flooding as a high hazard. So having said that, we have high levels of flooding throughout the state right now. We've seen it in 2021 in Murray County. We've seen it in Davidson. We've seen it in Chairman Reedy's district with Humphreys and Waverly, my first week in this position. And we've seen 3,800 rough events from 96 to 2022. 19 of those dealing with flooding have resulted in major disaster declarations, which take decades to respond to. I was fortunate enough to work on the Humphreys County Waverly Task Force working to recover that community and continue to work on that. 61% of all property damage in the state of Tennessee in that time frame has been from flooding. So as we look through this, as we look through the amendment of the bill, I agree with Chairman Vaughn. There are certain things that should not be considered wetlands. If a tractor tire goes in, that example, 100% agree with you on that. But when we start to talk about low-level wetlands and as well as even in this bill up to 4 acres of what we consider moderate acre wetlands, don't require permitting, don't require mitigation to go against. There is concern that flooding would go up because of what we've seen today and what we've seen over the last 5 to 10 years, as well as knowing that with that natural mitigation piece, if we start to take it away, I think it is a realistic assumption that if the water isn't going there, it's going to go somewhere else. So as we look through that, that's kind of where we are on looking at the flooding piece. And I would just, open up to any questions anybody might have.
We have some questions here, but before we start with those questions, I'm gonna go ahead and allow Mr. Gregg and Mr. Jacob to go. Is it Mr. Gregg or Mr. George? Mr. George, okay.
My name's George Nolan with the Southern Environmental Law Center, and I'm grateful for the committee's time and attention. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that the conservation groups are frustrated that we've been shut out completely from the legislative drafting process. Last week, Representative Shaw wisely said that the stakeholders should get in a room and figure out what's best for Tennessee. And that has not happened. We were not given a copy of this bill and asked for our views on it before it was filed. And the conservation groups are important stakeholders who should be at the drafting table participating before legislation is proposed to this honorable committee. The pending proposal is no compromise, and it does not protect Tennesseans and our natural heritage. With all due respect, the bill puts the interests of road builders and developers over those of future flood victims and Tennessee taxpayers, and it will result in the rampant destruction of important wildlife habitat. The amendment contains a broad category of so-called low-quality wetlands, and it allows developers to pave over and fill those wetlands with zero protections or requirements, regardless of how big they are. A wetland could be as big as 50 or 100 acres or larger, and as long as it's labeled low quality, developers are allowed to fill it with concrete without regard to the impact on neighbors or wildlife. The amendment also contains a category of moderate quality wetlands, which have many pristine and positive attributes. In other words, really, really good wetlands. and it allows developers to destroy up to 4 acres of those good wetlands with zero requirements. Now, 4 acres is the size of 3 football fields. It's 6.5 times the size of the state capitol. It's big enough to accommodate 12 single-family homes. And allowing developers to destroy good wetlands that are that big with zero analysis of how it will affect neighbors and water quality and ecosystems would be wrong. This amendment goes way beyond what is needed to address concerns of regulatory overreach when some cattails are growing in a tractor rut. And as presently drafted, it's a prime example of industry overreach. We have a moral obligation to be good stewards of God's creation. This amendment does not satisfy that obligation because it doesn't strike the right balance and it hasn't been vetted. So please don't rush through the task of designing a system for protecting our wetlands. That task is just too important not to get right. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. And just for the record, you're welcome to have to draft any amendment you would have and have any member on this committee file that amendment. But I don't believe that you have a member that has filed an amendment for you. So it's not necessarily Chairman Vaughn's responsibility to file amendments that are necessarily a compromise with anyone else, just for the clarification there. Jacob.
Thank you for having me. Good morning. My name is Jacob Bile. I studied the law and economics of natural resources. I went to Vanderbilt University for a JD and PhD, and now teach environmental economics and law and economics at Western Kentucky. I'm here on my own behalf today. My research is centered on the trade-offs in situations where economic uses of land come into conflict with environmental benefits, such as when harvesting timber destroys endangered species habitat. There are serious trade-offs involved because harvesting timber is economically valuable. I grew up in a farming family, so I truly understand that. There are also environmental amenities coming from places like forest land that have economic value too. And so today, I'm here to talk about the trade-offs involved in developing wetlands, which I've also looked at in my research. So to analyze these trade-offs in an economic way, we need to have a sense of the economic benefits at stake. So to do that, we measure ecosystem services as streams of benefits that flow to people. Wetlands provide streams of ecosystem services like flood mitigation, water filtration, wildlife habitat, and recreation, as this committee has heard about. We can quantify those benefits in dollars because people value them, even if they're not directly traded on markets. Sometimes economists look to the cost avoided in needing additional water filtration or flood damage. Sometimes we look at what people are willing to pay to travel to a wetland. And sometimes we directly ask people. When we measure what people are willing to pay for those ecosystem services, economists have come up with numbers like $6,600 per acre for rural wetlands and $11,900 per acre for urban wetlands, which come from estimates in Georgia and are cited in a report on the economic value of Tennessee wetlands by the Baker Center at UT. They cite those as low values in a range of values. The precise value of ecosystem services of wetlands depends on the quality and size of the wetlands, but also where it is in relation to where people live, work, and play. A private landowner cares deeply about their land, but may not internalize all or even most of those ecosystem service benefits. A lot of those benefits flow to downstream neighbors. Economists call this an externality when actions of one person affect another, and it's the basic rationale for environmental regulation. If we leave things to the private market, we get inefficient levels of ecosystem service benefits. I oppose this bill because the externalities of ecosystem service benefits of wetlands are substantial, important, and site-specific in a way that justifies having regulatory involvement when decisions about filling wetlands are made. If we don't take seriously the ecosystem service benefits of wetlands now, there will be tax dollars at stake in the future. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. First on the list, we have Chairman Todd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bella mentioned that the low-quality wetlands could, any kind of damage removal impact to low quality wetlands could, it seemed from your testimony, could impact flooding. And I would point you to the language in this amendment that low quality wetlands specifically, as far as flooding goes, they would have to provide only minimal hydrologic functions as measured by the department's wetland resource assessment tool. So that's already part of the equation in their tool to make sure that even fits that category. So they're not going to qualify for that, or even moderate quality. You scroll down to that, it's modest hydrologic function. So those are assessed already in the department's tool that they use today. And so I would think that that's taken care of in this. I'll just point out for the record, I guess, as we're out of session, and I can do it on the record in session, either one. But when we're talking about flood mitigation, woodlands, grasslands all slow down water. They store water. They let it run off more slowly. They provide some flood mitigation. We don't regulate those at all. That's off the table. So to have that characteristic as a big part of this is just difficult for me to do, because we don't, and I would argue that there are many, many, many times more acres of woodlands and pastures that are providing that flood mitigation than there are isolated wetlands. So I don't put a lot of weight in the flood mitigation part of this because of that, just from standing from that reasoning. So I just wanted to point that out to the language of the bill, and you might not have seen it, but that's something I would draw everyone's attention to. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Alex, you recognized.
I have, through the chairman, Chairman Todd, we have looked at that, and I think part of the concern where we have it in the flooding piece is we do have all of the farmland. We do have all of the forest. We do have these isolated wetlands. And even with all that, we have seen significant levels of flooding. The piece where we talked about the private property owners, you've seen in a lot of cases, and I'll use a specific one in just a second, that the effect of what happens on one property or in one locale can directly affect another locale, even if it's not in a flood zone or it's not a wetland. We look at what happened on August 21st, 2021. The 21 inches of rain that came down and did not come down in Waverly, they came down in McEwen. So there was an effect where that water moved. I'm not saying isolated wetlands, if we'd have had 500 acres more, would have fixed that, but it's primarily meant as an example of something can happen one place and directly affect somewhere else. The other piece that I would mention on this is where we're talking about these wetlands, they may not be in a flood zone. As we talked about in other meetings and other task forces, we also recognize that these flood zones that FEMA have, specifically in Humphreys County, that I'm most familiar with, are from 2009. So as we've developed, we know these are outdated. We know what happens when heavy rains come. We know there are other parts of the state, like in the southeast, Hamilton County, with high levels of flooding that occur, that there are places that are not in flood zones that may be isolated, but a collective change of that, even up to 4 acres of moderate wetlands, if you continue to compile that, you continue to add those together, at what point does that create a hazard? Because we're working with older data from flood zones, so developing there may cause a problem. And any subtraction of natural mitigation piece, I think it's very, without a built-in mitigation, without a secondary built-in mitigation, I think it's reasonable to believe that water will go somewhere. And we already have a problem with flooding in the state that we're working to address, both legislatively with the Storm Act revolving loan fund to be able to provide 0 to low interest loans to municipalities to build up mitigation projects. It's carried by Leader Lambert, as I said before. And so removing of natural mitigation factors, even if they're small, I believe is kind of counteracting some of the progress we're making in other places. And I do think that there is a a strong difference between the tractor tire route and 4 acres of moderate wetland use. I acknowledge those are significantly different things, but that's where the concern, because if you start to patch together 4 acres of moderate wetland on 4 acres of moderate wetland on 4 acres of moderate wetland in a certain area, the secondary effects could become present. And if we're not having to study it, we're not having to permit it, I don't know that we would know what the effects are until it's too late and until we see flash flooding. Because if we pave over, we know water moves quicker on pavement and non-porous surfaces. I hope that addresses some of what my concern is.
Thank you for that. And Chairman Todd, you got a follow on?
Just one follow-up. A lot of times, and I've been involved in mitigation projects before, I know they strive to have the mitigation in the same drainage basin, same watershed, but not always. And so if it's really hard to even argue that you're going to have a landowner pay a bunch of money to mitigate something on property A and if there's a flooding concern and some mitigation related to flooding, when the mitigation property is not even in that same area for flooding. It's further downstream, further upstream, over in the next watershed, whatever it may be, just because of logistics. So those aren't even mitigated today, I would argue, in a lot of cases. So we're not really trading 1 for 1 or 2 for 1, unfortunately. In those, it's on paper it looks good, but realistically in the real world, it's not always being taken care of. And so I appreciate your information, though. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Representative Fritz, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kind of a general question for any of the three of y'all. I heard some things and we've talked about flooding a lot. And it brought to mind the fact when 7 Boy Scouts in the area just between Representative Travis and mine in 1929 were drowned in a flooding event. I think it was 3 inches of rain that had fallen up on the plateau, come down the creek, and horrible, horrible thing. And we certainly don't want that. But I'm having a hard time connecting that to a person utilizing their private property under permit with a third party evaluating it, and how we're connecting those two types of, traumatic flooding, awful thing, which we want to do things to prevent, with the development, again, of that person's private property. And so my question to any of the three of y'all, if that's okay, Mr. Chairman, is how do we make a data-informed decision? I asked this a couple weeks ago, and I hear lots of things that get my attention. I promise you, I'm sensitive to this, but I'm not hearing the data. I heard things from I think an expert last week that said that single-digit percentages of rainfall events actually make it into the aquifers in these isolated wetlands. And so do we have a data-informed plan to argue against a 4 acres or a 2 acres or a 7 acres or whatever? Or are we at a point of just conjecture that this is bad and we shouldn't do it? And so I offer that question with the utmost respect, but I do think we need a scientific approach at this, not one based on emotion.
Whoever wants to jump.
I will start off and then turn it over to you guys. I think the permitted piece, what I'm talking about in my testimony, through the chairman, apologies, is this idea of not having permitting, any type of permit required for low level or up to 4 acres. That's where the biggest concern, because if it is, in my opinion, personally, if it has gone through some of the studies with no rise, we're talking downstream, and it's deemed valid, I have absolutely no issue with that. That is done to keep communities in compliance with the National Flood Insurance Program. When we go through the permitted piece and the studies part is done, we don't see an issue with that. I can't comment on the procedural piece of that permitting and regulations. It doesn't fall under ours. But I taking into account potential effects, not only to your land, but like I said, to someone else's land that may be downstream from you, I think are important. And the same way that it would protect someone that's downstream from you, that it would protect that landowner if someone upstream from them did something.
Representative Fritz, would it be beneficial to you if we had someone from TDEC answer that question as far as
Perhaps, Mr. Chairman, I do have one follow-up to
And
that.
that's
if I
fine.
could ask.
If there's someone from TDEC, I know that you're on the list here, Greg, Ally, or Blair, if y'all would make your way up, whoever wants to.
Mr. Chairman, my
Go
follow-up to
ahead.
that would be, I understand. And so is the number 3.5 that you're comfortable? Is it 3? And what's the driven answer to that? And if indeed the wetland is isolated, is not the evaporative process taking, and only a single-digit percentage, if what we heard a couple weeks ago or last week was correct, then is not the evaporative process taking much of the water back into the atmosphere in these lowlands?
Through the chairman, I would have to defer that to someone much, much smarter in that topic than I.
Mr. George, you look like you're sitting already.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Fritz, I would say that we should be careful about using the term isolated. Now, it has a legal import in that the Supreme Court in Sackett defined it as being a water body that doesn't have a continuous surface connection to a river or lake or a stream. But we all know that wetlands can be connected underground to aquifers and also streams and rivers. So you can have a wetland that's really big, that's really close to a river, but if there's some dry land between the wetland and the river, then it might meet the legal definition of isolated. So I think in terms of your question about how do we get to data-driven solutions, one thought that we've talked with several people about is the idea of this committee tasking the Tennessee Board of Water Quality, Oil and Gas with the responsibility of coming up with a regulatory framework that's based on science by the end of this year that governs this particular very important topic. And the advantage of doing that is that everybody could bring forward scientific experts before that board. TDEC could, industry could, the conservation groups could, and the board can consider the science when it's trying to figure out what the framework should be. So that's just a thought I would offer in response to your question.
Representative Fritz, your first question, you want Commissioner Young to answer?
I will do my best, Chairman, and thank you. First of all, thank you to this committee. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, individual members of this committee, for all hearing this out and working hard and diligently to protect Tennesseans and their resources. So thank you. Representative Fritz, I do believe that there is an opportunity to base decisions on science. That we do that in general every time we issue a permit. We balance the various types of resources that would be impacted and those resource values of those impacted resources and look to offset those impacts elsewhere. And it is we have what's called a stream quantification tool that's used for streams. There are certain it's called TRAM, Tennessee Rapid Assessment Method, that is used for wetlands. So there are those scientific criteria out there that we do employ as part of our job. Yes, sir. Does that? I hope that answered your question.
Representative Fritz?
Thank you for your patience, Mr. Chairman, and folks. I appreciate your time. I want to make a good decision on this, and I understand that there are, but I've hit that Missouri point now. Show me. I want to see that data and how it drives determinations for what size we would limit. If there is or isn't an isolated, as this gentleman just stated, again, we heard single-digit percentages make it into the aquifers. Maybe I misheard that from what we had defined as isolated wetlands. So I'm kind of at the show me point. Let us see some of that data.
Commissioner Young?
Thank you, Representative. Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate your concern. I appreciate your diligence on making sure we get it right on the science. I share that desire to make sure we get it right on science, fact, and law, and generally what we do as an agency. So thank you. To hopefully give you some assurance that we are trying to get it right, I do want to share with the committee that we have heard you. We did meet, TDEC did meet with Chairman Vaughn yesterday after receiving his latest amendment, and TDEC also had some very meaningful discussions with some of the stakeholders that are in support of the bill yesterday to really understand the goal of the legislation and share our own scientific implementation concerns. Per your request, we are working with the sponsor, but we believe that some of the questions or the provisions in the amendment do diminish that ability to manage water resources in the state in a responsible way. To Chairman Todd's point made last week about other states' regulatory framework, you are correct. They are indeed different across the nation, including in neighboring states like Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia. And they do regulate isolated wetlands differently than we do in Tennessee. Now, we do believe that scientifically that is justified, given that we have a broad range of, as Director Blackwood put it, mountains to a river. And scientifically, that's very different than what you find in other states. So thank you for the opportunity, and I yield.
Representative Fritz?
One last, I promise, Mr. Chairman. So my diligence on this is our founders. You know, we all know the Declaration of Independence, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. But many of our founders in their writings considered that third item to be private property. And so I think, you know, by my oath, I have to filter what I'm looking for in data through that. So help me. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Fritz. That cleans up our, go ahead. We'll give you a last second here.
I was just going to say, private property does include this idea of externalities, that my actions affect other people's private property as well. And there are nuisance laws and other ways that we try to deal with that through the legal system. But regulatory oversight is another one.
All right. We have no one else on our list. Thank you all for your time. Also, Mr. George, I want to bring up the fact that Commissioner Young here will be happy to accommodate you in any way. Maybe I'm putting words in his mouth, but if you have any concerns about going forward, just reach out to TDEC in their office and they'll do everything they can to help you, I'm sure.
Thank you, Mr.
They'll be
Chairman.
corresponding back and forth with Chairman Vaughn. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Without objection, we'll go back into session. We'll let them clear out and let Chairman Vaughn come back to the podium. We're in the posture that the bill was amended. We are on the bill as amended. Do we have any questions for Chairman Vaughn? Let's go with Representative Shaw first, and then we'll come back to Chairman Holsey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I did hear you say, Mr. Chairman, that you wanted to park this in full committee and work on it some more and adjust some of the issues that people are concerned about. I don't want to misquote you, but is that what I heard?
Chairman Vaughn.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I don't want to misinform you either, Representative Shaw. I want to see this become the law of the land in Tennessee. However, I am willing to take some time to go through some discussions with the department to see if we can address, if we can come to an agreement, further agreement than we are today. I think that this amendment based on versus what we had originally proposed is a significant change that has come forward from the conversations that we've had. But at the same time, I don't want anyone to think that unless we all sit around in full agreement with one another, because sometimes people can't reach agreements. You know, not everybody agreed with Noah's forecast. And so
A whole lot of them didn't agree.
and somebody was right. And so what I would say is that I'm willing to get as close as we can, but at the same time, understand that there are some very fundamental differences of opinion that people have with regards to this issue of private property rights. Whenever there's something seen for the public good, then people are, let's say that a road is, let's say we need to widen Highway 64. And when we widened Highway 64, they came in, they took part of my property for the public good. I didn't need Highway 64 and all the riprap that's on my property now, but the general traveling public, it became a safer road, I will acknowledge, but I was paid for that. They didn't ask me to go out and build that for the public. They didn't tell me that you're going to give us this land because it's a necessity. What this is, to me, is it's just another form of a taking. And I'm willing to work within that. And I don't want anybody to have any misconceptions or misunderstand where I'm coming from on this. But I want to make this better because the vast majority of people have no idea until we started talking about this several weeks ago. I bet most people still don't understand the technical requirements and expense that they have to go through for them to try to use their own property until you're in the middle of it. And they have no advocate to help them out except for the people who make the rules, and that's us. And I feel fine that, study groups can meet and talk about all this kind of stuff, but at the end of the day, we're the ones that are elected by 70 some odd thousand people to make the laws. And if laws are made and we need to adjust them, I'm fine and dandy in doing that. But yes, I'm willing to talk and continue conversations, and I'm willing to offer additional amendments to it as a result of these conversations, if we can reach something that I believe is beneficial to everybody without further encroaching upon private property rights.
Representative Shaw.
Thank you, sir. I felt much better about it before than I did after. Thank you.
Chairman Halsey, we're going to recognize you now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And, when you started, we were talking about ponds on private property, and I was right with you. Still am right with you. When I'm like Representative Fritz, I've got to sit on a platform of constitutionality and what's right. At the same time, I want to be responsible and reasonable. But somehow we've gotten from ponds up to 4 acres. Where I live, a 4-acre pond is a daggum lake. I can't imagine the development, maybe there is, of trying to grade over a 4-acre lake to develop it. But is your focus still on these small private property issues where you got a pond and you want to grade it over and build a barn on it? Or is this going to necessarily expand because of definitions to much bigger things than that?
Chairman
Vaughn. Well, first off, let me say, Chairman Halsey, that one thing was misquoted by the gentleman from TEMA, and that is at 4 acres, you still have to get a permit. You have to get a general permit from TDEC to do that work. It's just you don't have to require to do mitigation. And whether 4 acres is the number or not, I'll be honest with you. The number where that came up from is that in order for somebody to subdivide a house lot without being in a subdivision is 4 acres, minimal transference of property. That's where that came from. If that number needs to be 1 acre, if that number needs to be 2 acre, that's the kind of stuff I'm willing to sit around a table and arm wrestle about. But that's where that number came from. But the premise is still the same.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Darby.
And I think I may have sorry, Mr. Chairman, but I think I may have just played poker with myself with that answer. So please disregard any numbers that I may have thrown out.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative, earlier you had indicated that 24 states presently use the waters of the United States as a primary source of wetlands. And you were nice enough to bring me that literature to my office. And I failed to keep up with it. What was your source for where you got that information?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That was a report that was in a professional publication entitled the Environmental Law Reporter. That was initially published in September of 2022, but it was republished in May of 2023. And the article was written by James McElfish. He's a senior attorney at the Environmental Law Institute. So it was all in regards to how to compare what happens around the Sackett decision. I know there'd been some question raised about the validity of some of the information that I've given you. So I appreciate you asking that about the sourcing of that information.
Okay, thank you. We have no other questions. Question be called on the bill. We will be voting on the bill as amended, HB 1054. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed?
Nay.
On the floor. And
Thank
if
you,
you
sir.
wish, if you are a no and wish to be recorded, please let the clerk know. I also want just to commend the different people who have been involved in this over the past 3 to 4 or 5 weeks. You know, I know tensions can rise, and I just appreciate the fact that everybody has acted in a manner in this committee that's much like a lady and a gentleman, and I appreciate that because not every committee can say that when they're done with a bill.
I appreciate y'all. Thank you.
Thank you. Next on the list, House Bill 1888. We have a motion and a second. Representative Vital, you are recognized. Seeing no amendments, is that correct?
That is correct, Mr. Chairman.
You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. 1888 is an administration bill on behalf of state parks. It ensures that Tennessee state parks can consistently and efficiently meet visitor expectations and continually deliver hospitality to its customers. Our Tennessee state parks have become more than just trails and waterfalls. They encompass marinas, lodging, golf courses, and more. Over the last 5 years, Tennessee state parks have increased the number of overnight stays in lodging by 58%, campsites by 32%, and cabins by 21%. Currently, parks have purchasing authority for inns, cabins, restaurants, golf courses, gift shops, marinas, snack bars, and vending machines, but requires state parks to go through central procurement office process for other venue that create revenue, such as campgrounds, non-marina boat rentals like kayak rentals, visitor centers, meeting spaces, skeet ranges, and shelters. Simply, this legislation will clarify that TDEC can use its in-house procurement authority for any park facility used in connection with fee-based recreation. For example, and I think we've all heard this example, if we have pest control at the lodge, we can't use it at the campsite. Simply, overall, this change will reduce duplication. It'll help us utilize the same vendors and facilities for which we currently contract and not require us to contract separately. With this explanation, I'm happy to answer any questions, or TDEC is here to answer any questions. Thank you.
Do we have any questions of Representative Vital? Question being called on the bill. You have a question? Okay. Look at there, bipartisanship. All in favor of sending House Bill 1888 full committee, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? On the floor.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, committee.
Thank you, Representative
Appreciate
Vital.
the nonpartisanship for state parks.
House Bill 1865 is next on the calendar. I'm talking 1665. Okay. 1665, I can't see. We have an amendment on the bill? Is that correct, Representative?
Yes, sir.
We have a motion on the bill. We have a motion on the amendment, 13307, that correct?
Yes, sir.
Representative Warner, all in favor of putting the amendment on the bill, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Amendments on the bill, you're recognized, Representative Warner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, committee. It's an honor to be here in front of you today. Very simple bill here today, and it has not to do with wetlands, but it has to do with water. What this bill will allow our veterans 2 days in the month of February to hunt waterfowl license free from the state. They would still have to purchase a federal duck stamp, but there would be no charge to those veterans. And some of you duck hunters here may help me, but I think there's 2 Sundays or 2 weekends in February that there's a youth hunt, and on those Sundays, maybe the veterans get to hunt also. And what this bill would allow is those 2 Sundays, veterans hunt free here in the state of Tennessee.
Do we have any questions?
Stand for any questions.
Do we have any questions, Representative? Seeing none, we'll be voting on sending House Bill 1665 as amended to the full committee. All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? All to,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman,
on
committee.
to full committee next week. Thank you. And last on the calendar is House Bill 1894 by Chairman Sapicki. Do we have a motion? We have a motion. We have a second. We have a second. You're properly before the committee. Chairman Sapicki, you're recognized. Do you have an amendment?
No, sir.
You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. House Bill 1894 is an idea that we talked about last year that was worked on with Farm Bureau and Senator Blackburn's office. I'll read you a summary, but the bill is very simple. Classifies any food that contains a vaccine or vaccine material as a drug under the Tennessee Food and Drug and Cosmetic Act, and what the definition is. Defines vaccine or vaccine material as a substance intended for use in humans to stimulate the production of antibodies and provide immunity against disease, prepared from the causative agent of a disease, its products, or a synthetic substitute, treated to act as an antigen without inducing the disease, that is authorized or approved by the United States Food and Drug Administration. Mr. Chairman, I'll answer questions.
Representative Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you. I'm not for sure I understand what you're doing. I've heard about this bill, but can you simplify for me exactly what you're doing? What happens if I go to the supermarket? If I'm looking for food that has no vaccine in it, what happens? And if I'm looking for food with vaccine, what happened?
Representative Speaker.
So last year we talked about that, and one of the things we were running into was trying to identify a head of lettuce that has a vaccine in it versus a head of lettuce that doesn't. And one of the things we were trying to do was create a labeling for that. Well, the problem is that starts to interfere with the Commerce Act. And so we pulled back from that. We worked with Farm Bureau. We worked with Senator Blackburn's office to come up with a solution to this. And what the solution is you can put a vaccine, a human vaccine, into a food source. Like they have the ability in California right now through UC Berkeley, that they can put a human vaccine into a head of lettuce. What we're going to say is that's fine, but when it comes to the state of Tennessee, we will treat that as a pharmaceutical. So you would have to get a prescription for that to make sure that we know how much of the lettuce you have to eat based off of your body type. So we don't under-vaccinate you, which leads to the possibility of the efficacy of the drug being compromised, or we overdose you based off how much lettuce is. All it does is we're going to classify these types of food sources as pharmaceuticals. So if you want to consume them, you would go to your doctor and get a prescription for them.
Representative Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Or if you didn't want that, you would just simply get them off the shelf or from the department you normally get them from.
That would be correct. So when you go shopping at the local grocery store, everything there in front of you would not contain a human vaccine.
Okay. Thank you for your help. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Sapicki, I did some research on this bill and looked up some facts from some scientists and people at universities who, quite frankly, share that this was a conspiracy theory. If you look at an article from the Associated Press entitled Fact Focus, COVID Vaccines Not in the Food Supply from April 25th, 2023, you have multiple scientists and researchers from these universities that claim COVID mRNA vaccines are being added to the food supply through livestock and produce. The facts, COVID-19 vaccines are not being passed along through livestock or produce, and experts say that would not be an efficient way to immunize someone. A flurry of social media posts are falsely suggesting otherwise. And the reality is that if we continue on, there are no mRNA vaccines for any disease being used in cattle in the U.S., according to the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, which they emphasize in a recent statement addressing online misinformation. Farmers and ranchers ultimately choose which vaccines, if any, to give to their animals. In addition, regardless, the notion that an mRNA vaccine could be transmitted to humans through eating meat is not rooted in science. This is coming from scientists from some of our most illustrious universities and fact-based institutions. Continuing on, it says, Ted Ross, a professor of infectious disease at the University of Georgia and director of the Center for Vaccines and Immunology, said in an email that no, it cannot be transferred. He said mRNA vaccines have a very short duration in living organisms and degrades. In addition, the mRNA breaking down quickly. In addition to the mRNA breaking down quickly, it is unlikely it would survive the cooking process to hypothetically be used by consumers as a way to get a vaccination. And so this just every scientist is telling us that this bill is not real. This is not based in reality. Can you respond to your research to show otherwise?
The first question I'm confused on is I've read my bill. There's no reference to mRNA vaccine. So I'm kind of, but to answer his question, from the University of California, Riverside, there's a study out there about grow and eat your own vaccines. It's already been published. The National Science Foundation Award regarding mRNA in plants, UC Riverside, once again, has perfected the ability to put mRNA vaccines into lettuce. BAT Biotech, using tobacco to make COVID-19 vaccine candidate. British American Tobacco will use this tobacco-based expression technology to make a not-for-profit vaccine candidate targeting novel coronavirus in tobacco plants. And then also, Kentucky Bioprocessing LLC has been infecting fast-growing tobacco plants with a genetically modified coronavirus to see if it could produce antibodies for a possible vaccine. Reynolds Tobacco can already do this right now. It's a fact. UC Berkeley has already been received a grant from the federal government to perfect this technology. Now, in third world countries, there might be an application for this with people that are starving to death and trying to get them vaccinated at the same time. We don't have that problem in the United States. All this bill does is say, if you want to do it, you can do it. It's not a problem. But when it comes to Tennessee, to protect the efficacy of the drug so we don't get underdose or overdose, and some of you are cattlemen here, understand what happened with aeromycin and why they banned aeromycin from our food sources, because you were underdosing the cattle and the horn flies were developing immunity to it. All this bill simply does is say that if a company does produce a food source that has a human vaccine in it, it'd be looked at as a pharmaceutical in Tennessee, and you would just go to a doctor to get a prescription for it, like you would for any other pharmaceutical.
Thank you for that. Representative Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Continuing on to other articles, Representative Sapicki, you have other scientists saying that this concept that you're discussing is far, far away from being proven. Even the study at in California at that university, it's not being put into our consumer produce. It's in a university where they're trying to test out if this could be used as a additional way to store vaccines. But no one is trying. The conspiracy that I'm pushing back against is that you're acting like they are trying to secretly vaccinate people by eating lettuce, which sounds crazy. People are not putting vaccines in our lettuce, in our beef. No one is trying to secretly vaccinate anybody. But this is what the narrative that you're pushing, is that somehow it's being hidden in our food supply. When you go to Kroger, when you go to Whole Foods, when you go to Kroger, when you go to Whole Foods, when you go to any of the grocery stores, you don't have any produce or meat that has COVID vaccine in it. And so that's what we're pushing back against.
Chairman Sapicki, you recognized.
That was a very good diatribe of putting words into my mouth that I never said, and I don't appreciate that. All I've said is, if a company produces a food source that has a human vaccine in it as defined in the bill, in Tennessee, we're going to treat that as a pharmaceutical. That's all the bill does. All this other is conjecture, Mr. Chairman. That's what the bill does.
Okay. Thank you. One follow-up there, Mr. Jones.
Thank you. And I'm the only one who's getting limited on the questions I can ask, and I've been quiet the whole committee. I just want to mark that for the record. My final question is that there are concerns about things being added to our food supply. These additives that we're adding, these dyes that we're adding, that's a real concern that I'm seeing. The effects on young people, we're adding red dye, all these things that other countries have banned in their food, but we're not even talking about that. Like, these are things that are already in our food supply that you can go to the grocery store, and Europe has banned a lot of these things that we're adding into our food. But vaccinations are not something that we see being used on a large scale level or being used on a consumer level. So I'm just trying to understand why we're making this an issue. It's feeding into this anti-vaccination rhetoric that is very dangerous and not rooted in science or rooted in fact. When if we really want to talk about what we're putting in our bodies and protect Tennesseans, let's talk about the additives we're allowing people and the injections we're giving to our to growth hormones, all these things that we're allowing in our food supply that these multinational corporations are bringing to our state, Tyson and all these other companies, and we're not pushing back against them because they have very powerful lobbyists here. But let's talk about the real threat to the health of Tennesseans and not do things that will just further perpetuate misinformation and the public health and public safety of Tennesseans.
Chairman Speaker.
Once again, no question, a large statement there. And the last time I checked, there's nothing prohibiting a member from filing a bill to address that issue. This bill just states, once again, for the record, that if a human vaccine is introduced into a food source, we will treat it as a pharmaceutical in the state of Tennessee. Mr. Chairman.
Representative Jones, you have a follow-up? Okay. Representative Fritz, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you bringing the bill. One of the things we face, and we faced over history, it's not just now, and it's not just on this topic. As we learn new things, there will be folks that say that couldn't be real. In the late 1930s and early 1940s, there were people that questioned the ability to split the atom and produce energy. We've proven that that was not a fiction, that we've harnessed it. And I would just say thank you again for running the bill and ask you this question. Do you think you have a right to know if the M&Ms, which I can no longer eat, have the red dye in them? And is that why the package indicates that there's an FDC red dye in the M&M? Do you think that's an appropriate thing to understand what you're eating?
Chairman Speaker.
You said an appropriate thing.
Yes.
Yes, I believe so, yes.
And then one follow-up. Is this basically doing the same thing? But since we understand that this is a drug and not just a red food dye, that the general consumer has a right to know, to be informed, and they can make their own choice?
Short answer, yes.
Thank you. Representative Shaw.
I'm listening, and so this legislation will only go into effect if that happens.
Recognized.
That's correct, yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Chairman Halsey.
I agree with Representative Jones on a lot of stuff that's getting added to foods that people have no idea and what it does, and over time, and hydrological or hydrolyzed oil and all that stuff. mRNA right now is used in cattle. It's a vaccine for cattle. I really don't like the process, but it is used. What you're dealing with, I've read some things about it, and I think the bill's absolutely brilliant, and I appreciate you running it.
I believe that wraps us all up. Representative Travis says, question on the bill. Question been called on the bill. All in favor of sending Bill 1894 to the full committee next week, say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Nay.
Please register with the clerk if you wish to be a no on this. Next week in full. That concludes our calendar, as eventful as it was. Thank you all for being here. We'll see you next week, 10:30. We're adjourned.